Today we're going to be talking about the French and Indian War. And this war is a prelude to the American Revolutionary War. And we're going to study it in a way we study a lot of history. We're going to try to understand the cause and the effects of the French and Indian War. We want to look at how it's going to affect and lead up to the Revolutionary War. So let's begin. At this time, the French held trapping and trade routes in the Ohio Valley. If you remember looking at a map earlier in class this year already, we saw that that Great Plains area on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains was owned by the French. Now, the English colonies were starting to encroach on the French territory as the population grew, as more colonists were coming over. They also competed over trade issues with Native Americans in that disputed region. The French were trading with the Native Americans, but so were the English, and they were trying to control that trade so they could set the prices. Now here you can see the boundaries as of 1754, so the start of the French and Indian War. The darker area is the English. Of course, we have the 13 colonies, and like I said, they stayed to the east of the Appalachian Mountains. And then there's area up north in Canada as well. The French have a lot of that western central part of the United States. And then there's this almost polka dotted area, and that's called the contested area. The colonies and the French were fighting over that land, over the Ohio River Valley area. First is the Battle of Fort Necessity. The French set up these forts along the Ohio River Valley to protect their fur trading interests. Some of these forts, though, conflicted with English claims of the land. Now, the Virginia governor sent a young George Washington in 1753 to deliver a protest to the French, saying, "This is our land, and you are now encroaching upon our territory." But that protest was ignored. So, the British sent a party to construct a fort on the site of modern-day Pittsburgh. And this is Fort Necessity. So what effect is that going to have? The French then in turn constructed Fort Duquesne. The next year, the British wanted Washington to expel the French from the site, get rid of the French. But Washington was quickly overwhelmed by the superior French army and their help of the Native Americans. Washington hasn't always been this war hero. This was his first failure as a leader. Washington had to retreat, Fort Necessity, and he had to surrender shortly after. And this is going to be the first incident of the French and Indian War. Now in 1754, the colonies sent delegates to Albany, New York, to discuss strategy for common defense, a common defense against the French and their Native American allies. And this is called the Albany Congress. Now, an approved document written by Benjamin Franklin promoted a substructure of government below the British authority to govern the colonies. It was a way to unite the colonies. Elected officials from each colony and a head official from the crown would make up this substructure. You can see here this famous image on the right, join or die. And it's the different parts of the snake. You can see almost all of the colonies. South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and then it's just New England. Now there's one missing, Georgia. Remember, Georgia is just supposed to be a land for the debtors. They're not really supposed to have governmental say. The whole idea behind this image is that we need to unite or we're going to be defeated by the French. Now, we're going to go through the war just in summary. From July 1755, the British sent a force from Virginia to attack Fort Duquesne. But again, just like what happened with Washington, the French win. However, George Washington gets credit for rallying the British troops. Even despite a loss, he was able to rally them and get them to keep fighting. This is often what wins a war. In the meantime, William Pitt became Prime Minister, and he was able to bribe both the colonists and Native Americans for their support in this war. And this is a war for the British, not the colonists. So he had to bribe both the colonists and the Native Americans to get their numbers on the side in order to win this war. The British were able to defeat the Cherokees, a Native American group in the South, and cut off French supply lines. Using this strategy, they're going to make it so the French can't get any supplies to continue fighting in the war. And by 1760, the British defeated the French in Quebec, up in Canada. Now, at the same time, while all this is going on here in the New World, in the colonies, there's also the 7 Years' War in Europe. Okay, and this is fought between British, Prussia, and Hanover, fighting against the alliance of France, Austria, Saxony, Russia, Sweden, and Spain. Now, the Prime Minister of England provided subsidies to Prussia to fight in Europe and committed British troops and resources to winning the war against French in North America. So Great Britain's stretched thin. They're supplying material to a war in Europe, but then they're also committing British troops and material to a war in North America. They're stretched to their thinnest capability. Now, the Treaty of Easton was signed in 1758 and essentially sealed France's fate. In the treaty, the British promised the 6 Iroquois nations to stop settlements west of the Alleghenies in exchange for their neutrality in the war. So they're saying, we won't expand and take over more of your land as long as all 6 Iroquois nations agree to not helping the French in the war. And this is making it so the French can't gain any more numbers. They also were fighting in that 7 Years' War, and they didn't have more troops to send over. They needed the Native Americans' help in order to win. Now, the Treaty of Paris, signed in 1763, ended the French and Indian War. The French transferred its claims west of the Mississippi to Spain and ceded its territory east of the Mississippi to the British. So just like before, the British territory stopped at a national... So just like before, when the British territory stopped along the Appalachian Mountains, a geographic feature, it's now stopping again along another one, the Mississippi River. Now, the treaties of Easton and Paris limited colonization to the eastern seaboard. Both made it so those colonies could not grow, which was the original intent of this war. But the British were still successful. And you can see in the map, they now own that orange territory as well as the lighter yellow color. However, this is going to cause Pontiac's rebellion. Native Americans quickly grew to dislike the British. First, the British exhibited very little cultural sensitivity. They traded unfairly, and they failed to stop encroachments on Native American land like they had promised in the Treaty of Easton. The French were much more fair traders towards those Native Americans. This unrest is going to culminate in a rebellion by Pontiac, a Native American leader who united various tribes, all with the goal of expelling the British, getting them off their territory and gaining that land back for themselves. The uprising lasted 3 years, from 1763 to 1766. Massacres and atrocities occurred on both sides. Both sides of this rebellion suffered great casualties. But the British played dirty. In order to win, they gave the Native Americans blankets that were infested with smallpox. Disease was what wiped out Native Americans when Columbus arrived, when other explorers arrived, and the British knew that tactic would work. Native Americans didn't have the immunities to things like smallpox like the British did. And of course, it worked. Now, violent incidents like Pontiac's Rebellion prompted the English crown to attempt to mandate an end to encroachment on territory promised to the Indians. So the Royal Proclamation of 1763, or as we're going to call it, the Proclamation Line of 1763, was meant to make sure English colonies did not go past the land they were supposed to. So settlers who fought in the French and Indian War with the goal of having more territory and having more land were told they could not establish themselves west of that proclamation line. However, this effort, this proclamation line, was unsuccessful and is viewed by many to be a leading cause to the Revolutionary War. Imagine risking your life in a war all to try to gain more territory, to have more land, to potentially increase your social status, only to be told you can't encroach on that land. It's going to frustrate you. Thinking about how that could lead to the Revolutionary War, we're going to end today. What I'd like you to do is look back at your notes one more time. See if you can draw those connections of the cause and effect of each event and how that might lead up to the Revolutionary War. All right, come ready to work tomorrow, and I'll see you then.